This is TWiT.
Tech companies exist. They keep releasing new products. People review those products, and we talk about them because people are making a decision whether it's a product they want to buy or pass on. And so joining us today to talk about Apple's new 13-inch MacBook Pro with M2 is Devindra Hardawar from Engadget. Welcome back to the show, Devindra.
Hey guys, happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. So before we get into your review of the 13-inch MacBook Pro, could you tell us a little bit about kind of Apple's pitch for the M2 MacBook Pro? What is this 13-inch model? What's it what does it have that's new about it? And kind of what are the selling points of this new device?
You know, I think what's interesting about this computer is that Apple really had no pitch for it. You know, when they announced their M2 devices and the M2 chip a couple of weeks ago, it was all about the MacBook Air because that thing was redesigned. It had a bigger screen. It had like thinner screen bezels. So much attention was paid on that. And I think as an aside, they're like, oh, by the way, MacBook Pro 13-inch, it has the M2 chip too. Let's move on. And that's pretty much it. It is the same computer that Apple released back in 2020 when the M1 chip came out. And even that basic design is the same one that Apple was using for several years before that. So yeah, it is the M2 chip in the old case closed. That's it. It has, you know, the same Retina screen, the same keyboard, the same two USB-C ports, which I found really paltry back then. To see them do it again, honestly, it kind of offended me a bit. So yeah, my review is all about, this thing, it's faster, sure, because the M2 chip is faster, but the MacBook Air has all these new features. It has the bigger screen. Like, it is weird that the Air was supposed to be the like ultra portable, slightly less powerful alternative to the Pro. And now the Pro is just kind of underwhelming, at least compared to the Air. The only difference for the Pro is that it has a fan, it has an active cooling system. So if you're doing like video editing or rendering or 3D rendering, this will be better for like doing big data encoding. But beyond that, like not really much. I would say for 90% of people out there, if you're looking at these two computers, the Air is going to be lighter, is going to be just as fast because we haven't tested the Air yet, but based on our last benchmarks with the M1, it's the exact same chip. Like, they're just as fast. It just slows down if you're doing longer jobs, basically.
As a reviewer, I'm sure that after you put up a review, you hear from folks. And I'm curious, in your long history of doing reviews, have you heard any anecdotal stories of people making use of the, what for some people is kind of an outdated technology, the touch bar, which is still on a modern Mac? Who is using that thing? Because I hear so much about people not liking it. I think the one place where I've seen folks champion that technology is for accessibility reasons. There are some folks who get a lot out of the touch bar in that space. Unfortunately, that is not a huge market of users for Apple's sake. And so if the touch bar is, as the tech journalism section would want you to believe, a horrible, no good, very bad idea, why is it still in this modern Mac?
Again, a question we don't quite know. You know, I talked to Apple a couple of times ahead of this machine's launch, and I think every time they gave me the same stock answer, right? I asked, why is the case the same? Why is the touch bar here? And they're like, some people like the touch bar. We think this is a fast-selling computer that a lot of people really like. And that was it. They never explained why. Nothing really changed with this. For the touch bar itself, I feel like the running theory is Apple had so much leftover stock. They were like, we gotta put this touch bar in one more computer. Or at least they had a lot of MacBook Pro 13-inch cases laying around. I could see the accessibility use case. The touch bar, the pitch for it is that you have this second screen that can change depending on the apps. I think for video editing apps, it can be the timeline, can help you scroll through tabs in Safari. It's kind of cool. Personally, though, I think it's a bad accessibility feature for people who need to remember where things are, because it's always moving the function keys. Instead of your function keys, you get these shortcuts, and they change depending on every app. Whereas I think most people, or a lot of people, if you're at a computer all day, you kind of get some sort of muscle memory for your keyboard for where your function keys are. You don't have that at all with the touch bar. Originally when the touch bar launched, it didn't have the escape key, which I know a lot of Mac users really liked. And eventually Apple sort of relented and gave you a little tiny escape key, like right next to the touch bar. So that was like one thing they kind of gave people. But yeah, I don't see I don't see a reason for including the touch bar. And my worry is that developers aren't really taking advantage of it anymore. So to me, in my review, I called it like the last human, the last proto-human with a tail. It's this thing that Apple did once. Going forward, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares about this thing, or at least nobody will develop for it. So you're going to have this computer with this screen that, few apps will actually take advantage of, and I think is less functional than just standard function keys.
On the flip side, though, if I could just jump in really quick,
yeah,
you've got MagSafe, right? That disappeared and then later came back by popular demand. Who knows? 5 years from now, the touch bar might come back. It might be like, oh, wait a minute. Actually, everybody does love it. Here you go. I don't think that's going to happen, though.
Yeah, I don't think that. Not that one's going to happen. Apple has made some curious decisions in terms of features they took out and brought back in. And I think MagSafe was always one where they were like, a lot of people thought they should have just kept it in somehow. So yeah, I'm glad to see it come back on the MacBook Air. Oh, also the MacBook Air has the better webcam. It has so many things better than this MacBook Pro 13-inch.
Yeah. So in your review, you kind of talk about, and I was hoping you could mention it here, folks who are trying to decide which Mac they should get. You mentioned that, of course, at the very base, the 13-inch model starts at $1,299. So $1,300 all in. And in comparison, the 14-inch MacBook Pro is about $2,000. But what I found interesting was a little bit of maneuvering you did with the specs to show a comparison between the two. Can you talk about that?
For sure. So yeah, that difference seems really stark at first. If I just tell people, hey, get a MacBook Pro 14-inch, it is a much better computer. They're like, look at that price difference. Why would I do that? I think the base 13-inch MacBook Pro is really anemic. It has 8 gigabytes of RAM. It has a 256 gigabyte SSD. If you're a professional, that's not enough. That's not enough storage. That's not enough memory. So for me personally, when I recommend laptops, I say try to bump up to 16 gigabytes of RAM. Try to get a 1 terabyte SSD because you can't really upgrade those things down the line, especially for a self-contained SoC like this. If you do that with the MacBook Pro 13-inch and the MacBook Pro 14-inch, the price difference is like $300. And at that point, I'm like, just get the 14-inch, guys. Get the one with the ProMotion screen that has a higher refresh rate and all the ports you need and a much faster processor and a slightly bigger screen too. So it just seems like if your business, if your livelihood revolves around your laptop and you're a professional, you really need to just spend a little more to get the 14-inch. This thing seems like a weird relic from the past.
Yeah. So then what about everything else that's involved in this machine? Like what, other than the M2, is there anything else that is new about it? Is the keyboard better? Is the trackpad? Look, I'm trying to dig through all of this. It's the same case.
It's the exact same case. That's it. Yeah. And that's why, this is still a very good computer. As I put in my review, it's still very nice looking, especially compared to a lot of PCs with like plastic cases and that aren't as well designed. But I think it is weird that Apple is just selling us the same exact computer, except for the chip in 2022, especially when all their other laptops, have the full function keys and have thinner screen bezels and have ProMotion technology, except for the Air. But all the other Pro devices Apple sells, like the iPad and the iPhone, they all have ProMotion screens. They all give you silky smooth refresh rates. You don't even get that here. So I was a little offended by them just kind of reusing old tech and still calling this a Pro machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just seems to stand out so much in comparison. So then say you've got a person who is they don't do video editing, but they do, they're a photographer. They edit raw photos from time to time, and they do their emailing, and maybe they use Chrome. So that's where we kick it up a notch. 13-inch MacBook Pro with M2 or the upcoming MacBook Air with M2 for someone like that?
Mm-hmm. I feel like for photo processing, I do a lot of that for my reviews as well. You're fine with the Air. I think you are pretty much fine unless you're doing thousands of photos at once regularly, like just really mashing up some raw photos and doing a lot of rendering around that. The Air is going to be just as fast. It's the same chip. It doesn't have a fan, so longer encoding jobs, it may slow down a bit, but for the most part, you're getting a bigger screen. You're getting a more modern screen. I believe it's a little brighter too. So for many reasons, especially for a photographer, you're probably better off with the Air. But Also, if you're doing a lot of work, you probably want a machine with an SD card reader. You probably don't want to run around with a couple of mini dongles. So at that point, again, the 14-inch seems to make more sense.
Absolutely. So ultimately, this model of MacBook Pro has you convinced that the 14-inch model is going to be the best, is going to be the kind of first stop for a Pro. Who then is this 13-inch MacBook Pro for?
That's a very good question. Again, I asked Apple that a couple of times, and all they kept telling me was like, people really like the MacBook Pro 13-inch, so we really think they're going to like this. I think this machine is there for the unsuspecting consumer who walks into an Apple store or a Best Buy, and they're like, I want something more than an Air. I want Pro, but I'm not going to spend $2,000 for Pro, so I'm going to get the $1,300 Pro. And I feel like that's it, even though the Air is going to be slightly cheaper, is going to have better tech in so many ways. It feels a bit like it's made for the unsuspecting mainstream consumer, not really the people who read tech blogs. And that's also why it makes me a little angry too. I feel like those consumers who aren't listening to these shows and reading my gadget reviews, like those consumers are just kind of left out in the lurch by Apple here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Devindra, I want to thank you for taking some time with us today to talk about this new device. Of course, folks can head to engadget.com to check out your work. Is there anywhere else they should go to be able to follow you online?
Sure. I'm at Devindra on Twitter, if you can see my ramblings about tech there. And I do also podcasts about movies and TV at thefilmcast.com.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.